Yeah, hi everyone. It's really great to have all of you here, and also hello to all of our online people. It's really great that you're hanging in there. And yeah, I hope you can follow us really well here. I'm going to give a super brief overview of our data collection methods and about our empirical evidence base that so far has informed the tool and the training, which we will hear a little bit more about later. So as Dr. Cook already said, we did three things to collect our data. Basically, we did a really comprehensive literature review on childhood in violent extremist communities. And we did that in various different languages, in English, German, French, Swedish, Dutch, and Albanian. And as I said a little bit earlier, we also did not only focus on returnee children, but also on children growing up in families with affiliation to right-wing extremism and domestic jihadism. On top of that, we did over 30 interviews in all the countries that we're currently focused on, and we did those interviews with family members of individuals who are associated with violent extremist groups, and with people who work with these families and these children to understand their needs better and to understand how to support basically both the children but also the people who ultimately want to help those children. So yeah, basically that's our research part, and then we also had a little bit more of an interactive co-creation of the tool and the training, and that also really helped identify more the needs of practitioners, the similarities and the differences between children in the far right, in returnee families, and basically their comparison also with children in other precarious life situations. So yeah, that's our evidence base, and I'm quickly going to run you through our findings, or some of our findings. And if you're interested, we will be in the other room later and can talk about this all more extensively. So basically what we found is there's not one type of family across the board, and not every child will be impacted or will be equally impacted by a family member's involvement in violent extremism. We also found that there is actually not a lot of quantifiable data to really draw a causal relationship between certain risk and resilience factors, certain child outcomes, and yeah, so we're unable to say one leads to B. But we did find that children in these families might experience challenges which are comparable with families in other risky environments. So, for example, our data suggests that families where violent extremism is present may face additional issues, like, for example, and we talked about this earlier a little bit, socioeconomic hardship, or they have other mental health issues, for example, substance abuse, or there's prevalence of domestic violence or divorces. And there are also some similarities between these children experiences and children who might grow up in other family profiles, like, for example, families associated with gangs or cults, or the experience of families who had to flee from their countries and lived in refugee settings. So that was one really interesting thing, but we were also looking at, so what is unique about families affiliated with violent extremism. And even though we didn't find that affiliation with violent extremism directly correlates with a child outcome, a specific one, we found that these children are exposed or may be exposed to certain risk factors. And the impact of these risk factors on children's development is well documented, but the frequency and the prevalence of these risk factors in each family is not. So we're still lacking a little bit of comprehensive, large-scale data on all of this. But we also found that there are several themes that emerged most frequently in the literature review. And we found that children growing up in violent extremist families might be subjected to a very wide range of adverse childhood experiences. And these experiences are often gendered. And this, interestingly, applies to both children in jihadist and in far-right environments. So, for example, girls are often prepared to be the child bearers who are staying at home, while boys are raised to become fighters. Sorry. But yeah, so we also found that children growing up under ISIS faced incomparable adverse childhood experiences. For example, they would experience rape, sexual abuse, and other unparalleled exposure to, and also at sometimes participation in violence. And that comes in addition to their experiences of war and detention camps. And children who face these adverse childhood experiences as a result of their family's involvement in violent extremism can show signs of PTSD, have attachment issues, and might be subjected to gendered norms and propaganda, which in turn can lead to distrust and in other people and in black and white thinking. So these experiences can have an impact on the development of these children. The data suggests that the relationship between children and their parents can be a source of various adverse childhood experiences in both far-right and jihadist environments. But what is unique in these families is that children seem to be often consciously subjected to a parenting style that might not primarily focus on their well-being. Instead, they might be instrumentalized for some kind of higher purpose, which goes in accordance with the family members' violent extremist ideology. And we found that manifestations of these instrumentalized upbringings could include children being exposed to violent extremist ideology and activities either at home, in summer camps, through propaganda, by taking these children to war zones, but they might also, as a result of this ideological upbringing, experience abuse, a very authoritarian and punitive parenting style, neglect, social isolation, and recruitment, active recruitment in violent extremist groups and activities. We also found that extended family members, so we looked a lot at the different relationships that these children experience because of their family members' involvement in violent extremism, and we found that extended family members can either worsen these factors because they might support the same violent extremist ideology, but we also found that, and I think that's a really interesting case in Sweden, where extended family members were really involved in the rehabilitation of children returning from ISIS. They can provide alternative relationships, they can provide support and protective factors for their development. And yeah, we also found very interestingly that family involvement in violent extremism can significantly shape the educational experiences of children and their social interactions with peers. So we found that violent extremist parents or parents affiliated with violent extremist groups, also in the far right, seem to avoid enrolling their children in mainstream educational institutions if possible. So they reach out to alternatives like either homeschooling or religious schools abroad. Some went as far as enrolling them in ISIS-administered schools in Syria and Iraq. Or they reach out to small independent schools where parents are trying to exercise control over the curriculum, which was a specific, very interesting case in Germany. We also found evidence that parents challenge the knowledge and the values that are transmitted to children in mainstream education, and that they actively teach their children in accordance with their ideology. So that means that children are or might be exposed to parallel worlds and knowledge systems where they often have to try to hide from educators what life is like at home and what the real way of thinking is. So basically they live in a very conflicting value system. And we found that in addition to the parents who play a strong role in shaping the children's lives, we also have the peer group. And parents chose this peer group, or may chose this peer group quite actively. So violent extremist affiliated parents might forbid their children to interact with children of non-violent individuals or non-extremist individuals, or they are restricting the extent of their activities in a way that they become outsiders in their own schools. And we also found that children from Syria and Iraq, or returning from Syria and Iraq, might be subjected to bullying and to stigmatization for a variety of different reasons, which can negatively impact their educational experience. We also talked to professionals, as I said earlier, so we were able to identify a couple of areas which we are, hoping to elaborate on, that we already did in the training and the tool, and that we're hoping to collaborate with further. So what we found is that multi-agency approaches are often very much required to work with these children and families. We also interestingly found that professionals who are working with these children or children in violent extremist linked families, so especially social workers, mental health professionals and so on, they already are trained very well to build cases of children in families, and they already often work with children and families with diverse and often very difficult family environments. So that basically means that when it comes to children of parents affiliated with violent extremism groups, we don't necessarily have to completely reinvent the wheel. There's already a lot of resources out there. But we also found that there might be some challenges that people working with these children face that might be relatively unique to the violent extremist component in there. So, for example, we found that cooperation with families is really difficult, or can be difficult in some situations, and that's really based on the level of trust that these families can develop with authorities. So the trust building element is really important, but also really complex, of course. Our participants also expressed the need to better understand how the presence of a violent ideology might impact the child's life uniquely. So that's what we've been trying to gather a lot of first-hand evidence on. So they would try to understand, or they would like to understand better, the ideological impact on a child, the types of environments and experiences that a child might be exposed to due to the parental involvement in the group. And they also found it really challenging to kind of fill in the gaps in a child's profile when there was missing information about the child's background. That means that these children might not always get the support that they would need, because there's just not enough knowledge around what the child has experienced. They also noted that practitioners often do not have sufficient support themselves to provide support for these children. So they were commenting on the structures that enable them to work with these kids. And yeah, finally we found that some practitioners, and that was very interestingly, specifically also a topic in the far right, that they might need help to overcome certain stigmas and misconceptions and fears of working with children, specifically in these families. So yeah, basically taking all these information, we use that as the basis for our tool and our training, and we will hear more about this after Meryl is discussing the human rights-based approach that we have taken throughout the whole project. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So indeed, I think it has been mentioned already this morning, a central focus of the PREPARE project is to ensure that the rights of the child remain at the core of the development and implementation of any programs, any interventions aimed at supporting children from violent extremist affiliated families. So in addition to the research and the literature review and the interviews that Lynn just presented, the International Center for Counter-Terrorism has also developed a guide that is aimed at supporting frontline practitioners on how to implement a rights-based approach that prioritize the needs of the children, their well-being, and the long-term prospects. Next slide, The report first provides practitioners with an overview of the rights of the child as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, including the 4 general principles that should inform the implementation of any other rights and should also inform any interventions directed at children. Namely, the non-discrimination principle, the best interests of the child, which should remain the primary consideration in any decisions affecting children, the child's inherent right to life, survival, and development, and finally, the child's right to express views freely. Particular emphasis has notably been placed on the best interest of the child and how this should be assessed on an individual basis, taking it into account the personal circumstances, unique characteristics of each child, as discussed this morning already in the panel. Each children is presenting a very specific case. In addition to these general principles, and of course, while all children's rights are equally important, we have also decided to detail some of the key rights of the child, which should notably be at the core of any best interest assessment. These include, for example, the preservation of the family environment and the right of the child to maintain relations and direct contact with both parents, even in cases of separation. The safety and protection of the child from all forms of violence, abuse, or neglect. The child's right to a standard of living that is adequate to his or her development. The right to health and to education. And finally, among many others, the child's views and right to preserve his or her identity. Next slide. Following this overview, the report also draws attention on some of the key challenges that might arise when it comes to safeguarding such rights for children that are growing up in violent extremist environments. These children may face unique stigmas and vulnerabilities that should be taken into account. There might first be infringements on children's rights that are directly linked to their parents' involvement in violent extremism. For instance, some parents might decide to impose alternative curriculums on their children that might not meet the basic standards as defined in the UN Convention. There might also be challenges linked to the types of policies and practices that are put in place and the impact they can have on the rights of the child, especially if not adequately designed or implemented. For instance, leading to further stigmatization, to breach of children's right to privacy, or to cause re-traumatization of children. Finally, practitioners might also encounter specific challenges when working with these children. I think Lynn mentioned a few already. For instance, difficulties identifying the nature and the extent of children's exposure to violent extremism, especially when children are instructed not to talk about it outside of their family circle, or the difficulties in establishing trust with external stakeholders when children have grown in an environment where they've heard narratives about mistrusting anyone outside of their immediate circles. Next slide. Finally, I think the key objective of any program for children of violent extremist affiliated families should be to ensure that their rights, which might have already been seriously challenged by their parents' affiliation with violent extremism, are not further infringed upon by inadequate practices. So the report finally provides guidance on identified good practices and practices to avoid to adequately support these children. These include treating children first and foremost as victims and avoiding security-focused approaches, even in cases where children might have been directly involved in violent extremism. Developing individually tailored and multidisciplinary approaches that account for each child's specific situation rather than one-size-fits-all solutions. adopting gender and age-conscious approaches that consider how girls and boys might have experienced their exposure to violent extremism differently, and also taking into account the age and development stage of children to avoid re-traumatization. Designing and implementing multi-actor coordinated approach to address the varied range of needs and vulnerabilities that some of these children might present. Ensuring that practitioners receive adequate training, including in trauma awareness raising. And finally, ensuring sustainable support for these children and long-term funding for programs that are supporting them. So this was a very brief overview of the report. Of course, very happy to answer any questions as well and to discuss any feedback some of you might have in the afternoon session. And I will now leave the floor to my colleagues to present the training.
So, hello everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying the day so far. So my name is Agnel and I'm a research analyst at Trilateral Research. And Trilateral Research was in charge of developing the training for this project. So in my presentation today, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the project. So the agenda for today's presentation is, so why do we need training for these practitioners and these children? So I'm going to explore that first, and then following on, I'm going to talk about the methodology and sources that we use to actually develop the training as well. Then moving on, I'm going to give you an overview of the training. So it focuses on a train-the-trainer format. So I'll explain what that is, and also give you a brief overview of the layout that was used as well. And then to end on, I'm going to be talking about the training's core components. So at the moment, the training has 4 blocks, and in each block, there's multiple sessions. And I can't go through all of the sessions in detail today, but then I can give a quick overview. But if anyone does have any questions, please do ask me in the afternoon sessions. Okay, so defining the need. So children in Western Europe may be impacted uniquely when an immediate family member, such as a parent, joins or becomes affiliated with violent extremist groups. So this linkage can have a harmful impact on the overall well-being and development of a child. So when the Prepare team was starting the project, we noticed a lack of comprehensive and open access knowledge for practitioners on the adverse experiences and unique stigmas that these children may face. So to respond to these needs, the Prepare team has created this training. So the aim of the training is to basically increase professional awareness of the unique experiences that children may have when an immediate family member is involved in violent extremist groups. And then the target group for this training is frontline practitioners. So that is anyone who's really working on the front line to engage and support with these children and their families. So these will range from social workers to youth workers to psychologists to doctors and anyone who's really on the front line, like I mentioned. So moving on to the methodology. As you can see, we had a number of different sources and methods that we used to develop the training. So the majority of the content from the actual training comes from the extensive literature review that Lynn just described. And then we also did a document analysis on the ICCT report that Meryl just mentioned as well. So this actually helped us to inform one of the sessions in the training. And then ICCT and Leiden University also completed interviews with practitioners and family members associated with violent extremist groups. And then Trilateral Research also did an online survey. We did some focus group discussions as well to get people to review the training. And in the past 2 workshops, we presented the training to practitioners and end users, and we got their feedback on it as well. And I want to say a big thank you to all the advisory board members as well for the continued contribution and input over the past 6 months. It has been very helpful, so thank you to them. And all of these methods help us to gather key needs, desired impact areas, and effective methods when developing this training. So moving on to the actual training overview. So as you can see, we have trained the trainer first. So the training is actually in a train the trainer format. So that means it provides practitioners and trainers with the required material and resources to train other practitioners and colleagues. So we do this by offering training tips on how to conduct certain activities, and also we offer suggested times on when to complete the different blocks. So these were created by our in-house trainer, Dimitro. And then, like I said, we have 4 blocks in the training, and then the blocks are divided into different sessions, but each session follows a very strict format. So as you can see, we start with the learning objectives, and then the learning objectives are 2 or 3 core sentences about what we want practitioners to achieve from this session. And then moving on, we have the open activity. So this is just to get practitioners to reflect on what they already know about the topic, what they want to learn, and it can, in some cases it can be a brainstorming session or a group discussion, so we have different activities. Then we have the actual information or the content. So the content is presented in a very simple and easy to understand format. So for people who aren't as versed in the topic or the field, they will still be able to understand, what's going on and able to get comprehend what's going on in the session as well. And then following on, we have another activity because we want to make this training as interactive and engaging as possible. We don't want practitioners to get bored. So we have a number of different case studies, games, role plays, brainstorming sessions, and group discussion questions as well. Then we have the key takeaways, which is basically like the learning objectives, 2 or 3 key messages that we want practitioners to be taking away from the session. And then if practitioners were interested in a particular area, we have additional resources as well. So these have links to different videos, guidebooks, handbooks, and reports. So we have multiple sources if practitioners were interested in a specific topic. So as you can see now, the 4 blocks are up behind me. So the first block, we focus on bias, stigma, and key terms related to violent extremism. Then following on, we talk about understanding the background and context in which these children live. And we also have a session on children's human rights. Then to follow on, we have a block that explores the life of the child in a bit more detail. So we look at familial involvement and risk and protective factors in this block. And then to end off, we have block 4, which is more practical advice and information and guidance for practitioners. So behind me now is the gigantic overview of the entire training. So like I said, block 1 and 2 have 2 sessions each, and block 3 and 4 have 3 sessions each. And then at the very right-hand corner, you can see support organizations. So basically, this is a list of different support organizations or government agencies that work with these children and their families. So if practitioners, doing this training do have any questions or concerns about a family or child in their care, they can access this at the very end of the training and go to the relevant authorities or support agencies. But the only caveat is the support organizations that we mentioned are only relevant to the 6 projects in 6 countries relevant to the Prepare project. So that is one limitation we have at the moment. And then moving on to block 1. So we start off the entire training with bias and stigma for a particular reason. So when I was talking to practitioners and in the workshops as well, practitioners mentioned the importance of understanding and being aware of your own biases, as it can impact objectivity and decision making when working with these vulnerable children. So we want practitioners to be aware of bias, the impact it can have on their work with these children, and also how to manage one's bias as well. So the importance of raising your cultural awareness and different things like that. And to actually start up this session, we have a game called the tag game. So it's actually a commonly used game to raise awareness of someone's bias. And also in this session, we explore stigma, because these children and their families are frequently profiled and reduced to common stereotypes. So in this session, we explore how stigma can be seen in the field, but also how to mitigate the risks of stigmatization as well. And then we also focus on key terms. So in this session, it's self-explanatory. So we talk about what do we mean when we say violent extremism? What's the difference between violent extremism and extremism? What do we mean when we say far-right? What do we mean when we say jihadist violent extremist groups? So, and we also look at returnees and foreign terrorist fighters in this session as well. And then for block 2, we really explore the background and context in which these children live. So, different factors need to be considered when, providing support for these children and their families. So a lot of things need to be considered, and we couldn't cover them all. But then we chose 8 or 9 core elements that were in the literature review, and we simplified them and we put them into the training. So a couple of the different things we look at here is alternative education, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, attachment, age, and gender. So what impact could these have on a child who has familial links to violent extremist groups? And then we also have a session on children's human rights, which basically summarizes what Meryl just said in a very 3 or 4 clean pages. So we have that. We don't want to overwhelm the practitioners with too much legal information either, but learning about these rights will give practitioners the tools to assess whether these rights of the child are being upheld and all children are being treated with respect and dignity. And then moving on to block 3, we start off with the Bronfenbrenner model, because this is a core element of the literature review. So for those who don't know, we talk about the different systems of the child. So the children's lives are multidimensional and interrelated. The entire environment of the child can be impacted by familial involvement in violent extremist groups. So we explore the Bronfenbrenner model here, and we link to how it can be seen on different levels. So that's explored in block 1, and then block 2, children can be exposed to unique activities and environments because of a parental link to violent extremist groups, and they can be sent to alternative education camps. They can experience abuse or isolation from mainstream ideas and values. So that's something we explore in this session a little bit. And then to end off, we talk about general risk and protective factors that are identified in the literature, but we also look at the school setting and family and extended family in a bit more detail. So what are the positive general factors, and then what are the general risk factors that you can find? And then to end off, we have block 4. So all the previous sessions were more information oriented towards the practitioners to really understand the life of a child, but this block offers a lot more guidance and practical advice for the practitioners. So we offer information, guidance, advice, and recommendations. So the first thing we do is talk about some key skills and positive characteristics that practitioners should have when working with these children. So we talk about, how do you create a safe environment for these children and their families? How do you become an active listener? How do you become a non-judgmental listener? How do you adopt a child-centered approach? And many other things. So we talk about how to engage with families or how to work with other professionals, because that could be a point of tension. So we mentioned some tips as well on that. And then for the next session, we wanted to be very interactive for practitioners, because working with an attorney child might be very different to working with a child from a right-wing environment. So we want practitioners to talk about the potential challenges that they might face, but also discuss possible solutions. So in this session, we actually have a role-play game for practitioners to try and find out, how would you deal with a child who has links to far-right violent extremist groups. And then to end off, we have a list of good practices and practices to avoid. So this session comes from the ICCT report that Meryl just mentioned, and the majority of it is, the importance of adopting a victim-centered, trauma-informed, age-conscious and gender-conscious approach, and also to not use harmful practices that might re-traumatize the child and their family. And that's the end of the training, except for the support organizations. But then to follow with the actual training, TNO has created a CVI tool. So I'll hand it over to Glenn to discuss.
Thank you. Before I started at TNO, I worked at Child Protective Services in the Netherlands, and I would like to tell you about a little anecdote that happened to me during that work. At the beginning, I think I was 6 months working at Child Protective Services, and as you probably all know, Child Protective Services can place children out of their homes in very severe cases. Well, I had to do that as well. And of course, this is an emotional event for the parents. This considered a single mother who actually, which I only knew for a few weeks, I think, had a new boyfriend. He was much older than the woman itself, but right after the out-of-home placement, I received severe threats, death threats, and the only information I had about that man was that he was an alcoholic. That was all the information I had, and I was thinking, okay, from my own education, I know what alcoholism means, what kind of behavior it can entail, but still, this man was like a ghost for me, and the behavior I saw was different than the behavior I knew from the books, and it got quite scary actually. It got to the point that I didn't want to go to meetings with that man. Because I made the threat so big in my head that it just became a huge threat, until the moment that I saw this man in court, because after you do an out-of-home placement you often go to court a few times, and then I saw the man. He was actually quite I don't want to say pathetic, because I'm looking for the right words, but I emphasized with him. It was a small, sad, but also frustrated man, and from that point I got to talk to him more and more, and understood why he reacted that way. And to give you a little bit of information about that before I dive into our tool. This man lost his former wife because their children also were placed out of home, and because they were placed out of home, his wife left him. And his only goal was to protect this new girlfriend from that happening to another woman. And he was, of course, very fearful that this woman would leave him again. The reason that I'm telling you this is, even though we and I know that it's very important to look behind the behavior of a person, behind the things you see on paper, it's very easily to still look at the threats, to still look at people as a potential risk. And I think that's the main reason that Prepare has come to life. And what really helped me is to get information, and I think that's also what we've been trying to do with the tool we've developed at TNO, with the team members now on the screen, but you will see all of our team members this afternoon in the interactive sessions, so you will get to know them as well. But we've tried to make a tool that really informs people about what these children encounter in their lives, to better understand them, to also be able to provide better help, to not see them as threats, because all the people around you will probably already see them as threats. So I think the job for us is really to not only understand these children, but to be able to explain to others as well that these children are very vulnerable human beings that are victims of the situation they were put in. They have probably never chosen to be in as well. Yeah, please. I will take you. I won't show the actual tool in this presentation. I will just guide you through the steps that we've taken through our process. This afternoon we will show you the tool, and we also made a clickable, which we will be telling you about this afternoon as well. The reason I want to guide you through the process is because part of you are also actually co-creators of the tool, because we've co-created it with the actual stakeholders, but some of you haven't. For some of you, it's the first time that you are actually hearing about this. Sorry for that. The nice thing about the tool, I think, is that it's one of the first tools that actually encounters it's one of the first tools that is actually child-centered and also looks at the child as a vulnerable child and not as a risk. It's literature-based, and it's based on the literature review that Lynn already told us about. And well, we also did a small online survey as well to discover what the actual needs are for professionals in the field. And well, after that, we had 2 stakeholder workshops in The Hague, 1 in Dublin, and we had several smaller stakeholder meetings just to really be aware of what the needs are of the professionals in the field. So then again, that's the collaboration with stakeholders. And well, that all led to us being here today. We finalized the product, and Lynn, if you can go to the next. So that's where we are now at the final conference, and you can right away skip to the next one. And I will show you what the process has been like. Well, as I said, it's based on a literature review and interviews with professionals. Based on this, we had over 200 possible guiding questions, and you can see guiding questions as questions that will inform you or guide you through things you can ask a child about what he encountered in his life. So questions that will provide you with the extra information. But what the guiding questions actually do, they also provide you with guiding information. So there's a guiding question with the guiding information telling you why you should actually ask this to a child or to a parent or to anyone else in the environment of the child. Well, as a user of the tool, you will also go through kind of a filter process, because you will fill in what kind of what kind of group or what kind of violent extremist group you're dealing with. Based on that, some factors are relevant and others are not, and the non-relevant factors will be left out of the tool. Those will be filtered out. So actually from left to right, you will go from a huge amount of questions to fewer questions you need to fill in, and from that questions you will get potential risk and potential protective factors of the child. So what the tool actually does, the tool is a process itself, and that's why we've called it a structured professional judgment tool. It really forces you to collaborate and to collect the information relevant for this topic, but also from the relevant parties that are involved in the life of your client, of the child. Some important additions, yes please, are, well, as I said, it's structured professional judgment. The child is at the center of the tool. The tool is aimed at the coordinating childcare professional, so it should be used by the professional who has the shortest and best links to all the other people who are involved in the child's network. It's not something that really we've tried not to double your work. We've really tried to be specific on the topic of violent extremism, because there are probably already a lot of tools that you're already using as a social worker. And well, again, I think it's really nice that we're finally seeing these children as vulnerable, and that we can show you from an evidence-based background, so from the literature. And finalizing, we have, it's kind of a disclaimer, I think. Don't think that our tool will be one that can diagnose things for a child. It's really an informing tool. And also, there are a lot of countries involved within this project. I hope there are also a lot of organizations within these countries who want or who are going to use our tool. This is just a proof of concept. We can still adapt the tool according to your needs, according to the legislation in your country. But going to the interactive sessions this afternoon, look at it as a proof of concept, and if you're interested, we can always further out the details together. Thank you very much.